In this last section of our global mission theme, I want to look at a couple of interesting figures. The first of which is a name that will be familiar to those of us at Candler School of Theology, Bishop Arthur J. Moore, for whom is the name for whom our chair of evangelism, presently held by Dr. Wesley DeSouza, is named. Bishop Arthur J. Moore was a preacher who came out of the Waycross, Georgia area. He was a railroad man, never attended a seminary, came through the course of study, and rose to become one of the premier preachers in the Southern Methodist Church in the 1930s at San Antonio, the first church in San Antonio, which was the largest church in Southern Methodist, in the Southern Methodist Church at the time. He was named and consecrated, he was elected and consecrated to the episcopacy, one of the last Southern General Conferences, and conducted most of his episcopacy from 1940 to 1960 as a part of the newly reunited The Methodist Church. He was Bishop of Georgia and Florida, but was also named President of the Board of Missions, and so oversaw the work of the entire Methodist Mission Board from 1940 to 1960, while overseeing North and South Georgia, as well as Florida, which included Cuban Mission, and was really one of the most traveled of 20th century bishops. His papers are lodged here at Emory University, and they make for some fascinating reading. Bishop Arthur J. Moore visited just about every country where Methodists had missionary work, except for Jerusalem. At that time, it had not been remanded or bequeathed to this as the state of Israel by Britain. It was a British-controlled territory. Anyway, he was an enormous figure, known to really be the de facto bishop of world Methodism from 1940 to 1960. He lived down at 1976 North Decatur Road as you're going towards Decatur, a very modest home there for many years, and ran World Methodist missionary work and the work of reestablishing Methodist work in Europe after World War II. This was his great legacy was reconnecting the Methodist Church's work after the destruction of World War II. He wrote a book called Christ After Chaos, laying out sort of an American Marshall Plan, an American Methodist Marshall Plan. And when I served as a missionary in Austria and Eastern Europe, I would go into many pastors' homes, and they proudly would show their ordination certificate with Arthur J. Moore's signature on it. He single-handedly, often out of his own pocket, sent money and supplies to pastors throughout post-war World War II Methodism, rebuilding the work there. He was also responsible for the formation of and the purchase and the founding of Epworth by the Sea to try to create a retreat center to commemorate John Wesley's mission work in the Georgia area, the colony of Georgia. At his death in 1977, Jimmy Carter was one of his pallbearers at Glenn Memorial United Methodist Church, as was my great uncle, who was a pastor in North Georgia, William Hugh Ruff. This is not Arthur J. Moore. This is his wax figure at the museum at Epworth by the Sea, which is his lasting legacy. Another 20th century missionary during the Methodist Church's heyday was E. Stanley Jones, who, after having a crisis of faith in India as a missionary, decided to reject the Western domination and cultural imposition of India, and began to explore with other Indian Christians and interfaith dialogues how Christ could walk the Indian road and be truly at home within Indian culture and contextualize. He wrote the classic book, The Christ of the Indian Road, in which he used the Indian Hindu form, the ashram, a kind of retreat center dedicated to sharing of religious text and interfaith dialogue, in which he adopted the dress of the guru and became a guru of Methodism and of Christianity, working with the Brahmin class. Methodism had always been successful among the Dalit, untouchable caste, but he was able, through interfaith dialogue and a simple reading of Christ without the overlay of the Western Church, challenging people to simply live by Christ's words as they understood them in the New Testament in translation. And this interfaith encounter had profound effect even on Mahatma Gandhi, and he became friend and counselor to Gandhi during the nationalist period. He was not the premier Methodist evangelist of the 29th century, that would be the 20th century. His books were published, he was pithy, he was original in his thought, and utterly dedicated to an indigenous Christianity in India, and his work continues to inspire today. We've talked about the AME mission, which began with Daniel Coker through repatriation to Sierra Leone and Liberia, and of course the AME has long-standing ministries and mission work in Sierra Leone and Liberia. This man here, Bishop Henry McNeil Turner, really consolidated and created more contacts with the American AMEs, with the repatriated AMEs, and through using this boat here, the African Methodist Henry Turner, the bishop, was able to really consolidate and expand the work of the AME in Sierra Leone and in Liberia in the 1890s. AME had numerous female missionaries giving great service. Nora Taylor, working with the AMEs that had settled in the 1820s and working together to form a more equitable distribution of society between the original settlers and the indigenous Liberians, where there was often this tension between the settler class, or the Americo-Liberians, and indigenous peoples within Liberia, spilled over when the indigenous people tried to throw off the rule of the Americo-Liberian original settlers, creating a civil war in Liberia from the 1980s to the 1990s. This is a picture of Monrovia, where I served my first assignment. You can see the plantation-style buildings. The Americo-Liberian settlers, who had only known slavery, went back and recreated an American political society, but also based on the plantation racial dynamics, often oppressed indigenous peoples of Liberia, and this caused the Civil War of the 1990s. This is yours truly, missionary across the street from First United Methodist Church of Monrovia, which had been functioning since 1822, older than many Methodist churches in the South in terms of the buildings. And this was the chapel for the Bonga School of Theology, which is to the left of the screen here. So this functioned as our chapel, sort of our canon chapel, and this is during the height of the Civil War there in Liberia. This is us, myself, the day of arrival, celebration of rejoining the Methodist mission there, and this is the entire missionary corps of the Methodist Church in 1996. It had, due to the war, had dwindled to simply 3 families. This woman here from America, Mary Zigbu, Janice McLean here, our conference secretary, and my wife and children, who are now all grown up, married, in law school and at Emory University. We were forced to evacuate as Easter spilled over in the Civil War again. Attempts to bring more equitable distribution of power and economics between settler class and various aggrieved people groups. This is the U.S. military evacuating us Easter of 1996. The society has gone through a lot of turmoil. The Methodist Church was in exile. Bishop Arthur Kula narrowly escaping with his life. But the church was able to return and be a part of the rebuilding effort. And one of her own daughters, one of the Methodist Church's own daughters, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, was elected president a few years back, the first female African president of any nation in Africa. And she is a member of First United Methodist, that building I showed you earlier. And so the Methodist Church has been a part of building and now rebuilding a new Liberia. And so the trust of leaders who are committed to the church and also committed to the freedom of Liberia, which itself stands for freedom, is a testimony to the kind of sacrificial work both missionaries and now indigenous leaders trained by the Methodist Church have exercised across the continent and indeed across the entire world.